should all feel a certain strain. I'm ashamed we cannot change. No one knows what is coming next. One thing's for sure, we're out of time. One thing's for sure.
much, but we needed less, yeah, than we do now. We were driving along the coast. I felt the ocean breeze on my face. Wanted to go as far as we ever could. So many years have passed, but even though we were broke as hell, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything. If I throw a coin down a wishing well, I wish I could feel it again, the way that I felt for you then. I know you think of it too. The car broke down and we ended up sleeping at the worst motel somewhere. We had rashes for days. Do you remember that? In spite of everything that we lacked, nothing compares to the freedom we had. I would do it again if you say the word. So many years have passed, but even though we were broke as hell, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything. If I throw a coin down a wishing well, I wish I could feel it again, the way that I felt for you then. 'Cause even though I wouldn't change anything, I wouldn't change anything. I know you think of it too. All of the things we went through. 'Cause even though we were broke as hell, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change anything. If I throw a coin down a wishing well, I wish I could feel it again, the way that I felt for you then. 'Cause even though I wouldn't change anything, I wouldn't change anything. No, I wouldn't change anything.
Hello, good evening everybody, and welcome once again to another live stream here on the Outdoors Station. On a beautiful evening. I hope you're enjoying such a marvellous evening that we can see out the windows here. Just want to say hello to everybody that has joined us in the chat rooms. I'm sure many people will be joining as time goes by. Ian McDougall, hello once again, Ian. Nice to see you. Thanks very much for coming back. Pete Simmons, is that somebody you know, Sophie? It seems to be a name from near you. Mum says hello, Sophie. And there's a handful of other people joining as we go, which is really good. This is what it's all about, you see. It's all very intimate, this. This is like having a nice quiet conversation with a friend or a chat. So, of course, we are speaking to Sophie Rooney tonight, the author of this fabulously entertaining book, Rundinavia, which I've read cover to cover twice, I have to say. So a couple of things really, bit of housekeeping. First of all, welcome to everybody that's in the chat room, and those people that are there. Please do drop a note to say where you're watching from. I'm sure Sophie would love to know who's joining us. I can see the numbers increasing slowly on the monitor, so I know many people are joining us on YouTube and Facebook, so welcome everybody. If you're watching this in the future, then do press the like button and subscribe button. Easy for me to say, I'll say that again, the like button and subscribe button, so you don't miss any of our future streams, because we're trying a whole variety of different things. And next week, if this weather holds as promised, I'm going to get outside and we'll do some pitching tents and tarps and having a stove outside. That'd be quite good fun. Now, the most important piece of information this evening is that Rose is in the chat room, and here's Rosie in the chat room.
Hi everyone!
And the most
Here
important
again.
piece of information is it's Rosie's birthday today. And she's very kindly acquiesced to join us here once again in the chat room. Now, Rose unfortunately has one of those birthdays which falls on the most unfortunate of dates. And usually it's a Backpackers Club meeting AGM, or it's when we're walking across Scotland doing the TGO challenge. So tonight she's having a bit of a luxury and having it indoors, and we'll have some bubbles and cake after. So let us introduce our guest. Now, on the 3rd of August 2016, Sophie Rooney set off with the bold intention of becoming the first woman to run the length of Scandinavia. From Nordkapp, the northernmost point in mainland Europe, to the German border with Denmark, 3,000 kilometres south, carrying everything she needed on her back. Initially accompanied by fellow trail runner Alice Kashafi, Sophie finds herself thrown into a solo adventure running through some of the most rugged scenery in Europe. In the first month alone, she battled extreme fatigue, dehydration, relentless bog, hunger and eventually illness, which resulted in hospitalisation. However, not willing to give in, Sophie pushed on, and in doing so she finds herself on the journey of self-discovery, which creates memories that will last a lifetime. In the book, we humorously travel along with Sophie, seeing the whole of Scandinavia as we go, the people, the places, the food, and the warmth from strangers that sometimes can only appear from stepping far out of your comfort zone. 103 days later, she arrived at the border with Germany, and this book, Rundinavia, is the full, honest, and amusing story. Sophie, good evening. How nice to have you with us. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, it's obviously going to be a night full of interesting bits of information, and I think the general introduction I've given there gives people a bit of an overview of what the journey entailed. So let's get started at the very beginning and tell us, how on earth did you get yourself roped into running 3,000 kilometres?
Well, when you say it like that, it does seem like you'd have to be mad to sign up. But basically what happened was I went along to a talk at a pub, a talk that this guy was doing, Alex Kashafi, and he'd just run the length of Britain barefoot. So he was talking all about that. And he then went on to say, oh, and next year, no, sorry, not next year. In a few months' time, in fact, I'm going to try and run the length of Europe. That was his route. It's the E1 trail. It's apparently a well-known walking trail that I hadn't heard of before that evening. And I basically just liked the look of it and thought, you know what, I'm going to give that a go, and asked to go along.
And so you did indeed, and it started very rapidly for you. So how long was it roughly then between that talk and actually starting?
The talk, I think, was in mid-March, and Alex had always planned to leave on the 1st of August because he was a teacher. So he was going to see out the term at school and then leave on the 1st of August. So I had about, is that 2.5 months, 3.5 months to prepare. Okay,
and let's put this in perspective. You hadn't really been a runner before this, had you?
No, I still struggle to say that I enjoy running because I find it very hard work. I've always been sporty and I've always liked doing various sports, but running has never been my forte. So I think the furthest I'd run was 10 miles once, and it was a really big push.
And as part and parcel of this, you decided to raise some funds as well. So you obviously, I can see the plank of thanks. What a great idea that is. Are these various people that have supported you?
Yeah, so these were actually people who supported the crowdfunding page. So every time someone made a donation, I would try and take a picture of their name on the board in someplace new, which ended up being a lot of random places around Nottingham because that's where I was living at the time.
And you obviously got stuck into your training, and understood you got a training schedule from Alex, and I can see here getting fitted for the appropriate shoes.
Maybe not the appropriate shoes, but they fit nicely. Yeah, basically Alex sent me over a list of like a how many miles to run each day kind of guide. And it tends to be really few miles during the week and then long runs at the weekend. And I just followed that basically like a Bible.
You obviously, as it says in the book, you had an experience with competing at a fairly high level with canoeing. So I presume your endurance fitness was sort of there, but running was an alien pastime to you.
Yeah, I really wouldn't say endurance fitness. I used to race over 200 and 500 meters, and I would do the 500 meters at a push. So I was used to doing 1 minute of really fast exercise. Um, Not anything like what I was going to get into, but it was something new and it was a challenge, so it sounded appealing.
Right, and so in part and parcel of this, obviously, Alex encouraged you, or you thought it was a good part of your training to undertake a ultra marathon, a 50k ultra marathon, and that was an enjoyable experience.
Yep. Oh, well, yes. I think I only cried once during that race, and then for the majority of the time, actually for all of the race, it was really good fun. Um, we were blessed with really nice weather. Doesn't look it there, but it was really good. It was a really good day. I was out running for 8.5 hours, I think, with some other ladies who weren't there to go fast. It was just like chilled. We ate thousands of sandwiches as well. It was the recovering afterwards that was more of a challenge. I wasn't, having not run that far before, I think it was a bit of a shock to the system.
Yes, right. Okay, so then come August, off you tooted to the northernmost part of Europe there, to Nordkap. I understand. Again, I've just cherry picked a few things out of your book, which I think people watching this might be interested in if they ever think of doing this route or a variety of routes, certainly. And the taxi from the airport to Nordkap was somewhat expensive.
I think it cost £100, which we were trying to keep the budget. It was pretty tight anyway, so we were trying not to spend too much money. And we got to this tiny island at the top of Nordkap, and they said, "Oh, you're still 50 kilometers away," I think it was. And we sort of, it was a bit of a hard hit on the first day, but we had to get there, so I guess we just did it. Maybe next time I'd plan that in advance.
Well, certainly, if you come across, you think of any tips as you're talking for people that might want to do this sort of thing, then do mention them. Right. Well, what I'd like to talk really is break it into sort of 2 or 3 sections this evening. In particular, the start at Nordkap and your first experience of heavy duty outdoor trekking at speed, if possible, and then as you got into the journey itself. So tell us about the first few days, because the first, am I right, the first 7 or 10 days you were going cross country? Is that right?
The first 10 days.
First 10 days. Okay. So what were they like?
Well, it was on the first day, I think Alex turned to me and said, "Right, don't worry about running today. We're just going to walk. We're going to try and walk the full distance." And I sort of looked at him like he was insulting me and said, "Anyone could walk 50k." And by the end of that day, I really wasn't saying the same thing. It was such a shock to the system. I think having run, even though when I left, I could comfortably, I would say, run a marathon on the road. As soon as you get on the trail, that's just blown out the water. And it's particularly this trail because it's covered in snow most of the year, which means if you run on it when there's no snow, it's mostly bog. And it was just hard work all the time. I was just flicking through my journal, and most days I don't write anything in there apart from, "This is horrible. Why am I here? Why did I sign up to do this? The scenery's great, but I'm in so much pain." And if I think back to those 10 days now, I'm not really looking back fondly, I wouldn't say.
No?
Even though I would love to go back to prove myself wrong, but I know I hated it. I was miserable.
Well, I know Alex, I spoke to Alex when he finished his E1, and he describes quite clearly what the experience was like for both of you. And if anybody's ever interested in listening to that conversation, you can find it over on the Outdoor Station podcast number 430. And there's a 2-parter there where he talks and explains exactly, in much more colourful language, what Sophie and he went through. But poor Alex, the first night his tent pole bust, so he was bunking down with you for the first couple of nights, I understand.
Yeah, and when that happened, I actually felt, because he was the expert, he knew everything, and then his tent broke, and I was kind of like, haha, see, maybe I've got the upper hand this time. But that was the only time I think that happened. Um, yeah, I can definitely say my tent is not designed for two people, and I don't think it helped lift our spirits that we were crammed in there. But you kind of have to make do. He did manage to kind of fix it. It didn't look good, and I think if it had seriously stormed, he would have been in trouble. But he made a makeshift stick, I think, to replace his tent pole. So after a couple of nights, we did get a bit more space. But
it sounds like you just have to make do. But looking at the scenery looks absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I would say it's like nowhere I visited before. I hadn't travelled to Scotland before I went, and I guess Scotland has its similarities, but it's just so big and vast and empty. And everywhere, even throughout when I was running on the road, I said to people every day there was something that made me say wow, like actually out loud, wow. And I do think if you get the chance to go visit, do just prepare maybe slightly better than I did.
Yes, and that picture pretty well sums up what it can be like if you're not prepared. So that was how soon did that happen?
That is on day 4.
Wow.
And I remember that because I didn't collect any water in that afternoon, and I remember going to bed thirsty and then having to go about 5 miles the next day before I did get a drink. And that, like I said, it was a learning curve. That didn't happen again. So
tell us, how were you feeling then during this first few days? I mean, you say you were well out of your depth when you first started and you hated it. Did that sort of feeling continue for the whole duration, or did you sort of start to blend in with your surroundings, as it were, and get used to the discomfort?
There were moments of days where I was enjoying it. Like I said, the scenery was like incredible, so that took your mind off things every now and then. I was really struggling. I had blisters on the balls of my feet, so actually walking was painful, so it was really hard not to focus on that. But yeah, like I say, I cried, I would say, almost constantly on most days. There was one day where we stopped early in a cabin and I cried because I was happy that we'd stopped. But it was just so hard, and I really questioned whether I could do it or not, whether I could keep going. Yes,
dangerous moments. But I understand that there was a couple of things that sort of turned your hand, that Alex hated water, and of course, being a canoe girl, you were quite happy with the water. So the river crossings, of which I'm sure there were plenty, you didn't find particularly difficult.
Yeah, no. The Norwegians seem to have a completely different idea of river crossing to what we would call a sensible river crossing, in that if the trail happens to go past a river, even if it's waist deep and quite fast flowing, you're sent through it. When we reached rivers, we'd be surprised if there were bridges over them. There were so many like wading incidents, and yeah, like you say, Alex was terrified of the water. I think it's more that he can't see what's going on underneath, so he's scared of that kind of aspect. And given that I've fallen in several rivers in the UK, I kind of, that was the one moment where I could feel confident in myself. So I got maybe 5 or 6 meters of joy every few days.
Just want to welcome Emily Rooney, who's joined us, so Siobhan Urquhart and Martha Wheaton. So thanks very much for dropping a note in there. Rose is in the chat room. She's happily chatting to everybody here, and if everybody wants to know where they can get the book from, she'll drop the link in for the book. But to welcome aboard, and if you've just joined us, do just say hi and let Sophie know who's watching. If you have any specific questions, of course, I'm going to try and do a sort of Q&A towards the end. Just put a capital Q at the beginning of your sentence so that we can spot it easily, and I'll pull it up towards the end. Right, let's now talk about that section coming to an end, because I know you had quite a momentous decision to make. And I don't know when you told Alex, but how did you feel when you came up to Maasai? Because obviously that was the first time you sort of hit the road, as it were, after doing the wild crossing.
I would say my main emotion was fear, because I had this irrational fear that I would be eaten either by a bear or an elk, or just, I don't know, I was really scared of going on my own, and I kind of felt like I'd never signed up to do anything on my own. It just so happened that it was going to have to go that way. And yeah, I was really scared. It was, I don't usually get nervous for things, but I was definitely nervous. But then I knew I'd told everyone that I was going to do it, so I didn't really have a choice. So there was that aspect. And then really also a massive relief at the fact that I wasn't going to be slowing Alex down anymore, because he could have been going twice as far each day if I hadn't been slowing him down. So I obviously felt a bit guilty about slowing him down. So knowing that I wouldn't be doing that anymore was a relief. And I just really hoped that I could start to enjoy it.
And what state were your feet in by the time you got to Maasai?
They were a bit grim. My blisters were getting better. I still had some on the edges of my feet, but because I'd been in and out the bog so much, they were. I'm trying to put this in a ladylike way, but there's just no way to do that. They were kind of crispy and just disgusting. And after a few days on the road, they improved massively. So I think it must have just been going in and out of the bog all the time, getting gritty, getting mucky, and not really being able to clean them off properly at night time.
Indeed, you've got to look after your feet when you're doing something like this. So here we are at Maasai, and I believe this is the actual place you literally parted company. That's that cafe there. You sort of sat in and said your farewells.
We did. We actually stayed a night in a cabin in Maasai, with the idea of like getting our plans together so we knew what we were doing going forwards, and also having a proper feed, because that building at the front there is a shop. I think it's a petrol station too, but they had a cabin out the back. So we stayed one night there and then went our separate ways the following day.
And so the next part 2 of the story begins then, and you hit the road. Well, I'm going to change over in a second to the slides that you sent me relating to this. So tell us, how was it? How did you feel when you started on the road? How long did it take you to get over your fear and nerves about where you were and obviously running on the roadside and wild animals or whatever else you were scared of?
I think I got into it fairly quickly. I found, because it was so much easier to cover kilometres on the road, it was so much easier to keep my spirits up and feel like I was getting somewhere. So I would just get into a routine of maybe do 10 kilometres, sit and have some food and a coffee, and then do the next 10. I find that breaking it down like that makes it easier. I wouldn't say I ever really got over my fear. As soon as it got dark every night, fear would kick in. And I would make sure I pitched my tent before that happened, so that I could be inside and, in that kind of safety bubble, which is ridiculous because my tent was just a tiny flimsy piece of material anyway. So not sure what it would have done if...
And as I understand it, you were camping literally on the side of the road here, or just sort of tucked yourself into the trees, because I presume there were fences there.
Yeah, so most of the roads have a reindeer fence either side. Not that I would have bravely strolled away from the road anyway. I probably would have stayed as close as was safe. But you can't really go too far. I think, well, just to prevent the reindeer running out and jumping in front of cars, they have to have these fences. So I'd usually just take a few steps back and try and get behind some trees, and then just pitch up, sleep there, carry on the next day.
And did you not find people stopping and asking you, offering you help or anything like that? Or they just ignore you as you were jogging along the road?
This far north, I saw maybe 1 or 2 cars a day. And I think they weren't expecting to see anyone. So by the time they'd noticed someone was on the side of the road, they'd gone past. If I did see people on the side of the road, often it would be like in a shop buying delicious snacks like that one. And they wouldn't really question anything. They'd just be like, oh, it's a hiker. or they would offer me a lift in the car, which I obviously couldn't take. So it was like, thanks, but I can't take that.
And how were you feeling at this state? Because I know, but as you got closer to Corona, you were obviously got seriously ill. Was it something that was building up slowly? Were you feeling lethargic and poorly, or did it suddenly come upon you?
Yeah, so I often try and work out when I actually got ill in the first place, and I don't really know. But when I was on the road, I thought that each day I'd get stronger and I'd feel better and I'd just start flying along. But actually, the opposite was happening, and I was getting more and more tired every day. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, which I found peculiar, and I was dizzy. So I just kept feeling worse and worse. And I'm not really an ill person. I don't really get ill. So I was kind of just of the attitude of, oh, just wake up tomorrow, it'll be better, and then just carry on. But it didn't. It just built and built until I was really struggling even to walk in a straight line.
And how many days are we talking about between Masai and getting to Kiruna? Did this take over?
I think it's just under 2 weeks, 12 days possibly. It is possible that the illness I picked up before then, and I just wasn't aware of it. But there was one day in particular on the road where I sat down and cried. I think it was Overa Sopero, which is in Sweden. I just sat down and cried because I was in so much pain and I just felt so rough, and I just didn't really know what to do. But then 5 minutes later, I just decided I was being silly and carried on running.
And I mean, these roads do look very, very long and very, very straight. It must have been mentally very difficult to keep your spirits up, and just seeing the road disappearing off ahead of you, and thinking, well, I'll be there in an hour or 2 hours or whatever the case may be.
I think, if anything, that kind of helped me in that I could measure how far I'd been, easily. They have markers every 100 meters on some stretches of the road. So I'll just count them off as I went past. I'm used to training in that way, sort of doing efforts and things. So I think it suited me. And also, there's no uncertainty, there's nothing unknown, it's not scary, it's just a matter of running. So I guess it made it simpler in that way.
Well, looking at those two pictures of you on the screen at the moment, with you now Skype, and obviously we're standing next to the tent there, you're definitely looking a little bit drawn in that one, and I think this was getting close. Yeah, there's your starting to feel really poorly expression. And of course it all happened in Kiruna. So just give people a brief idea of actually what the problem was, so they understand the seriousness of it.
So it turns out that I'd had a stomach ulcer, and it had been bleeding obviously internally without me knowing they think it could be up to 2 weeks. So they couldn't obviously be sure exactly when it started or how it started, but I had been taking ibuprofen, so that could have been a cause. And basically I had bled so much inside that my blood volume was half of what it should be. So I was severely anemic and just not in a good way at all. And I had to have a blood transfusion. So from this point onwards, I was actually half Swedish, which is convenient.
And you then had to recuperate, presumably, before you hit the road again. They wouldn't let you out and onto the wilds. And you were fortunate to have a guardian angel that was looking over you and helped you out, I understand.
Yeah, I was really fortunate because when the doctor said I could keep going, I was obviously like, yes, this is brilliant. But then they added the caveat that I had to stay in Kiruna for 7 days to have blood tests and make sure that everything was going back to normal. And I I looked at my bank and I thought, oh gosh, looked at the hotel prices and was on the verge of, having to either say, well, I just can't afford to stay, or ring my parents and, beg them. When someone who had actually got in touch before the run to help out buying some kit and things, he had seen what happened and he was really worried. So he phoned me up whilst I was in hospital and said, what can I do to help? And I obviously didn't ask him to pay for my accommodation, but he went, well, you have to stay there. Can I pay for that? And just offered, and yeah, he really stepped in, and yeah, I can't express how grateful I was for that support. So
Well, that was phenomenal, certainly. So there's Karuna there on the map, and you were fairly fortunate by the looks of the accommodation that you had while you were recuperating. So it was obviously fortuitous, and that must have lifted your spirits physically as well as emotionally to be resting there and recovering.
yeah, I had a great week. Obviously, for the first half of that week, I still felt awful. My headaches were terrible. I think I probably stayed in bed. But the doctors at the hospital, actually, they were a young group of girls, and they said if I was feeling better later in the week, I could always go out for a meal with them. I also went to see a film that was in Swedish, but I thought it was in English. But I went to watch it. It turns out it was in Swedish. I sat through the whole thing because I felt too embarrassed to leave. So, yeah, it was a great week. And in terms of places you have to be whilst recuperating, I guess Sweden's pretty high up there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to see. I'm sure any Swedish watching will be very grateful for that. So you left Kiruna presumably feeling, not 100%, but getting that way, and then you headed down to Abisko, which is another few days away, I understand. There's your antibiotics you were taking with you. That must have rattled as you ran along the road. So how long did it take before you were feeling much better?
I would say I was feeling a lot better as soon as I started going again, and I really struggled to. The doctors said not to try and push it, so they said only do a couple of hours at a time, walk, don't run, and make sure you're eating lots. So I managed to eating lots and mostly walking. I did do a bit of running whenever there was like a downhill or anything, and yeah, I was feeling generally pretty good. I just had this nagging fear that if I did push it, it would come back, or if I had a slight twinge in my stomach or anything like that, like a slight headache one day, I'll be like, this is it, it's coming back, it's the end of the world. But no, fortunately it just carried on improving.
Well, that's good to hear. So you arrived, I'm not too sure which one of these slides it might be, but you arrived at Abisko and you saw a friendly face, I understand.
Yeah, so I arrived in Abisko and I was super happy because I planned to stay in the hostel there, and also to pick up a parcel from home. So I was getting fresh shoes, which was great because mine were destroyed from the trail, and I had a warm shower to look forward to, etc. But it turns out that Alex, because he'd been delayed in waiting for his new temp pole to arrive, he was actually staying there too. So even though he'd gone a completely different way, and stuck to the trail all the way to Abisko, we happened to be there at the same time. So yeah, it's great to see him.
Well, that must have been a wonderful feeling to have a friendly face and somebody who knew exactly what you'd been through. He must have been quite impressed with your recovery as well, and your story, certainly.
Yeah, I got the feeling he was feeling very much cooped up and he couldn't wait to get out of there. Whereas I got there and I was like, wow, this place is amazing. I'm going to have a shower. I went out for a walk with the other people in my room to try and see the Northern Lights. And yeah, I would say we had different attitudes about having to stay there. But yeah, it was good to see him.
So tell me something, did you ever ask Alex what he thought the night that you met him for the first time?
What he thought?
Would you like to know?
Oh,
Hi, Bob.
I don't know.
Hi, I'm Siobhan and I do.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Sophie. I guess I should start with when I actually met Sophie for the first time, and that was in the Greyhound pub in Derby. At the bar, I was trying to order my drink when someone randomly and rather abruptly interrupted my flow as I was trying to work out what combo of drink I wanted, and said that they'd really like to run a really long way through the start of winter, definitely through autumn. I clearly didn't make it really obvious that it was going to be ridiculously hard. After that, really, I gave her the best advice I could, some training plans, which I'm sure Sophie followed. and then it was a case of getting the run done. She was stubbornly optimistic. I've got to say, I've never seen feet look quite that dreadful after just 2 or 3 days of travel. In fact, I've never seen toes that look like they'd been skinned from the base upwards. Even on the hardest days, she seemed to push on. Didn't admit she was tired very often. Found the strangest things amusing, although I think we were both like that, a bit delirious. And I think one of the most impressive things I've seen anyone do was Sophie changing her route completely and deciding to go her own way as opposed to follow the route which we'd both researched and we'd both decided to follow, even though it wasn't necessarily going to get us to where we wanted to go. So yeah, that's pretty much all I could say about Sophie. I did think of writing a little limerick about I know a young lady who lived in a shed, but I decided not to. So, hi. See you later.
Little note there from Alex, which I thought would be of interest to you, as God's his thoughts. Now we're sort of time's moving on rapidly, so let me just say, people if who are watching this, thank you very much for dropping a note in the chat room. I've got a couple of comments here I must read out. Shirley Waterhouse from BDCC, just finding it really interesting. Thank you, Shirley, for your comments. And Felicity Rooney wants a shout out. Fame. A fortune. Elton Foister. Hi Sophie, it's Elton here with my daughter Daisy. Steve Crofts. Thank you. Hi Bob and Sophie. Usual top quality. Thank you, Steve. And Elton Foister, Daisy would like to know, do you run overnight? So did you run overnight during this particular run? I don't think you ran overnight at all, did you?
No, not at all. I think the latest I probably ran was 6 o'clock, and that was in Denmark. And it was dark, but there were street lights. I'm an absolute chicken. So as soon as it got dark, I did hide away in my tent. Elton, by the way, was my proofreader, and he really helped with getting the book out there. So big thanks to him as well, as he's listening in.
And of course, we must remind people, this is all about the Rundinavia book, which I can recommend, thoroughly recommend. Both the hard copy and the digital copy is available. If you'd like to know where you can get it from, Rose will drop the link into the chat room for you. But it is a really good book, really good read, really enjoyable. It's quite captivating. So I must congratulate you, Sophie, and your team that put this together. Now let's move on slightly to, as I say, time's rushing on. We have our next sort of major incident that occurred a bit later on. I'm going to pull some slides up in a second. So just after you left Abisko, just give us a sort of a few comments on how you were feeling and how things progressed for you.
So leaving Abisko, I think that was probably one of the peaks for me, in that I'd seen Alex and I've been like, well, actually I've now made it this far on my own, and I suddenly felt confident that this was it now. I could do it. So it was just a case of running each day and just keeping doing what I was doing. And I actually started to enjoy it, which was obviously nice. That's an example of my gourmet cooking, which was just some linguine. And I honestly can't tell you what's in there. Maybe tomatoes, maybe not. Anyway, so yeah, I would run every day. I ran from Abisko. I went out to the Norwegian coast to see the fjords, which just spectacular. And that really is, it made me emotional when I reached the fjords, like seeing how beautiful it was, somewhere where I've always wanted to visit. So it's a real treat. And then, obviously made my way south, following the roads, which aren't really designed for people on foot. There are a lot of cyclists, I would say, in that part of the world. And when I say a lot, I mean you'd see one every few days. But just kept running southwards. So I'm seeing these pictures now and remembering how cold it was, and just thinking, what was I doing?
It looked like it was because you were running into winter, weren't you?
Yes. So because of the delay at the start and everything, it was sort of October, and it was always kind of like winter was on my heels. And I was really fortunate in that I had great weather throughout most of September, I would say. I think there's just high pressure and just blue skies day in, day out for a good 2 or 3 weeks. But then it did really start to get cold towards the end. I think I was camping in -10 some nights, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone, really.
Well, it certainly shows your spirit and toughness that you kept going through this. Now, I'm just trying to find through the slides where we start to get to another place of interest, which happened at Tretton. So let's sort of introduce us to the story at Tretton as I move towards it.
So the story at Tretton really begins in the north, where there are small tunnels that happen quite frequently. And the first one I went through, a truck came the other way at the same time I was going through, and he honked his horn, and it was one of the scariest things I think that's ever happened. And from that point, I was like, I don't think I should be running through tunnels. And for a few days, I think I stuck to the rule of I'm not going to run through any tunnels, and I actually hitchhiked through. But then they started getting shorter again, like where I could see the end, so I'd risk running through them. And then when I got further south, tunnels they're not really a thing as much when you're further south, because it's not quite as mountainous, and I guess they've got more space, and yeah, you just don't see as many. But just outside of Lillehammer, I found this tunnel, and it was early morning. I'd camped just up the road from here, and I looked in it and I thought, well, it looks pretty wide, pretty well lit. It was 4 kilometers long, and I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna go for it. And I ran down on the side there. The crash barrier ends, and that walkway is still there the whole way through. So I just thought, I'll pop in my headphones. There you go, you can see clear pathway. I'll pop in my headphones and I'll bolt it through here, and it'll be absolutely fine. And I think I got halfway through and I saw flashing lights coming towards me, and I thought, oh gosh, thinking maybe they won't be for me, but they did. They pulled up in front of me, and quite forcefully, but not too forcefully, I guess, like told me to get in the back of the van, and they wanted to check all my details and things, which was, you know, I didn't know if it was unlucky or someone had told them I was there or whatnot. And I did feel bad. I'm not great at breaking the rules. I'm good at bending the rules, not so great at breaking. And I sat in the back of the van and I thought, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to pay a fine. You know, just frustrated, a bit like annoyed at them for holding me up as well, I guess, stubbornly. But then whilst we were in the back of the van and they were taking my passport details, there was a huge crash, and I just heard the officers from the front of the van jumping out and running backwards. And then the person who was in with me was like, oh gosh, I best get out too. So she was like, just wait here. She got out the back of the van, went to join them, and it was just kind of chaotic. You could hear all these noises. There were lights everywhere. And what happened is, because the police car had stopped to pick me up, and then cars had queued up behind the police van, a car that was coming through the tunnel, probably, you know, pushing the speed limit, hadn't had time, because it is quite a long straight tunnel. But anyway, either way, they hadn't had time to stop before they hit this queue of traffic, and they just ploughed into the person at the back. And I have never felt so awful in my life. Like, my heart sunk through my stomach. It was just awful. And I started crying as soon as I realized what happened. And I think that really emotional crying that you do when you feel like you couldn't possibly lose any more liquid and you've got a headache, and it just felt like the worst thing in the world. And running through my head like, oh my gosh, I've killed someone, or what are their family going to think? Like, have I injured someone? And I think it felt like I was in there for hours. It could have been minutes. I don't really know. But eventually the police officer came back and saw how distressed I was, and she was like, oh no, it's fine. Everyone's okay. We just need to tow the car off. And I just, it was a horrible experience. And even, you know, knowing people are okay, then I started to worry, oh, is the damage my fault? Am I going to have to pay for their repairs? How am I going to do that? And just, yeah, stressful times. And they drove me back to the bus station in Lillehammer, and I just remember sitting in there for the next hour or so, just not knowing what to do before setting off. Yeah.
That must have really been an emotional roller coaster for you. And did you seriously think about stopping at that stage and finishing completely?
Yeah, I think it was later that evening, because I was sat there in the bus station in Lillehammer, which is another town I've always wanted to go to because of the Olympic history and things. And I was just like, oh, I don't know what to do. I just wanted to get away from people. So I left the town, I pitched my tent, and I just laid in my tent. I cried again. And I really thought, you know what am I doing here? I could have been the cause of someone losing their life because I was lazy and didn't run an extra 7 kilometers or so around this tunnel. And I really just, wasn't in a good way that night.
Well, I can see it still upsets you now, so let's move on from that and talk about other things. The whole journey, you obviously totally relied on your phone, particularly at the beginning, obviously when you changed or decided to change and take the road route from Masai. I take it that must have been probably the most vital piece of equipment that you had.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. Apart from maybe the tent, which is your shelter and your cooking stuff, I guess.
But
most importantly.
But it was not only your mapping system and obviously communication, but you obviously kept in contact with people at home, the family, and also people that were handling your social media for you.
Yeah, so the person I got in touch with every day was Siobhan, and it kind of happened by chance. She was doing my Facebook, and I just found it easier, I guess, to check in with her very quickly, and then that was it in the early days, than to check in with several people. So Siobhan kind of had to become my ears, and from that point onwards, it just became a habit, really. Any major decision I made, I'd run it past her first, and
Well, let's hear from Siobhan and see what she thought about the journey.
Hi, I'm Siobhan, and I did Sophie's social media while she was doing Rundinavia. I'm one of 3 additional mothers that she adopted from the canoe club that we're all at, Banbury District Canoe Club. And I think she asked me because I wasn't working at the time, unlike Helen and Colette, the other 2. What started off as just really doing some updates on social media when she couldn't get there, it turned into a far bigger involvement, which was fantastic for us, really. And we were in touch pretty much every day throughout the journey. And obviously there were some, good points and bad points along the way. And overall, I think it was more good points. But I think what came out very clearly in her text was just how hard it was and the relentlessness of it. And I think she's probably skipped over that a bit in her book, to be honest. I think it was really, really hard. She was cold and wet, and she was just walking and running for miles and miles and miles on her own, and then having to pitch a tent and then eat what little food that she might have. If she hadn't been near a shop that day, it might not be very much. And I think, I think she's in some ways belittled what she's done. I think it was a huge achievement. There were obviously some real low points. I think she was struggling obviously at the beginning, and in hindsight she was probably getting ill then, but I think making that decision to break away from Alex actually turned out to be a real high point as well, because she then got control over it, what she was doing. And I think for her own peace of mind, that was a really positive thing. Obviously the big low point was when she was in hospital, and certainly I was keen that she was able to understand it would be fine if she came home at that point. She could go back out and do it again, but she needed to know that option was there. Rightly, she turned it down. But I think it was throughout the journey, we were there as much as anything just to say there are alternatives. And I think for her, a big issue was when she would decide to stay in a hotel or was offered accommodation, or when she got a lift through a tunnel, and she would then be racked with guilt that this was the wrong thing to do. And there was no rule, but she had this rule in her head, and I think getting her to accept that actually it wasn't just a question of getting from the top to the bottom as quickly as possible, but actually making it an adventure and a journey along the way. And I think she gradually accepted that more and more. And I think, therefore, the opportunity to meet people, and particularly through Denmark, which was just phenomenal, I think that then made it far more of an experience for her. There were other low points. I think the tunnel obviously would have been horrific, and she was so upset with herself and so shaken by that. But I think, it was a lesson learned, and luckily no one was hurt. I think at that point say she had enough chapters for the book, and would she just get on with it and just get back safely. But there were so many high points, and I think, as I said, going through Denmark, the fact that through social media she had nowhere to stay, and the whole thing just got sorted out through a complete stranger. And I think that came out throughout the journey. It was the kindness of strangers, the ones who would give her a cup of coffee or some fruit or some food, or let her stay somewhere or take her into their homes. And I think it was a real testimony to just how kind most people are, really. There were some amusing moments, not all that we saw, but the images will be left there indelibly. Sophie pulling a trolley along, shopping trolley, and Sophie wearing a skirt made out of a sleeping bag liner because she'd done her washing. Sophie having drunk quite a lot of gin and orange, I think it was, and dancing until about 5 a.m. But then, stupidly, she was cross with herself the next day because she felt she'd let everyone down. I said, it's her journey, it's not our journey, it's hers. And she was meant to enjoy some of it, because most of it was pretty miserable. And I think that, as much as anything, the lesson learned is to adapt as you go along. And yes, you might have a big plan, but that can change along the way. The big plan was still to get from A to B, but you might not have to camp every night, and enjoy it and embrace it. And from our point of view, it was a joy and a privilege to be involved in it, really. We loved every minute of it, and it was great going back last night through all the texts just to remind myself of how miserable it was for her out there. And how often we just kept saying, recharge your batteries please in your tracker, because we had a great time following the tracker and looking at it on Google, but I think about every 3 days I was telling her to please recharge your batteries so that we know you're alive. And I needed to find someone else to stalk once she'd finished. But well done, Sophie, and thank you.
Well, that's a nice note there from Siobhan, and I hope that's put a smile on your face to cheer you up after that last part of the story. Right, well, we're coming towards the end, so if you do have any questions for Sophie, please put a Q at the beginning of your question, and I'll add them to the list. There's just starting to build at the moment. There's only a couple of questions coming through, so if you've got any interesting questions or any points you want to ask Sophie, then please do that. Do remember that we were just dipping at the book. There's only snippets of the entire contents that we've actually dipped into, only 2 or 3 points.
I think the first house I was offered to stay in was the people who ran the Polar Circle Centre. So just crossing the Arctic Circle, they were like, yeah, just come back, stay with us here, have some waffles. They cooked me dinner, they gave me wine. They sent me off the next day with some miniatures that they'd got from Latvia, I think, which was a fun touch. But yeah, so people just being friendly everywhere and not thinking twice about saying, yeah, come and stay with us, that's fine, which is really humbling and yeah, just lovely. And then Siobhan really undersold the role she played. So when she was putting all my updates on Facebook and getting in touch with everyone she thinks she could help, she got in touch with a guy called Ture in Denmark, I think he speaks and maybe organises adventure races. He also does a lot of long distance adventure things himself. He's a real athlete though, not like a pretend one like I was. And he knew someone in every corner of Denmark, and he just set it up perfectly so that I could run 50 kilometers and stay with one family and then be passed on to the next. And that's how I went through Denmark, just going from house to house, being fed ridiculous amounts of delicious food. And then the girl who's in the photo with me there, she ran with me on the last day from her family home. She'd only run, I think, 10 kilometers before that day, and she ran 21 with me to the finish line. So yeah, just really, really friendly people pretty much everywhere I went in Denmark. And it was all down to this guy, Ture, getting them all into, organising them all and making it happen.
Well, it certainly looks like, as a comparison to the start of your adventure. It was a much more pleasant ending. And
Yeah.
and what about the end itself? You know, hitting Germany, was there an almighty party and hundreds of people there for you?
It was funny actually. I like at the start of the adventure, I thought, you know, this is going to make me into a famous adventurer, and I'll cross the line in Germany, and people will be there clapping and everything. And it wasn't like that at all. It was basically my dad drove all the way from home to come and pick me up. He brought my two younger sisters with me, so obviously it was great to see them. They were there. The girl I ran with, her mum came to pick her up, and then I think there was one other lady who got in touch on Facebook and just said, "Oh, can I come down and meet you?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, the more the merrier." And it was kind of very low key. They had some Danish army people manning the border, so they were a bit like, "What are you doing, you mad woman?" And because I ran up to the sign, which was actually slightly further back than the crossing, then I had to run back, and they were a bit like, "Oh, this lady's clearly lost her mind." But yeah, they humoured us, and that was kind of it. We just just put my stuff in the back of the car and we drove off. And yeah, that was kind of
how some of these adventures come to an end. It's surprising. Sometimes an almighty celebration, other times it sort of fizzles out. And obviously, how long did it take you to wind down once you got back in the car and drove home? A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then you were bored again?
Well, I'm trying to think if I have, you know, properly wound down from it. I think I came back a completely different person, I would say. And for a couple of weeks, I went around on this high. You know, I was feeling really confident and like, yes, I did it. And then yeah, so you start. People say to you, "Oh, what's next?" And then you suddenly go, "Oh, I've just got home. Like I don't know." And then you get all this like, "Oh, what shall I do next?" And yeah, I'd say I had maybe 2 or 3 weeks of being fairly chill. And of course, it was nearly Christmas, so I had good distractions.
Right, and of course everything's changed since then, hasn't it? Okay,
Yeah.
so people, if you've got a question for Sophie, do drop it in the chat room now. This is going to be your last chance. Put a Q at the beginning of it so that I can add it to the list. If you want to follow Sophie, obviously that's the book. A great read, as I say, so I'd thoroughly recommend it. Sophie's social media is here, and I'm sure she'll be glad to answer any questions you might have in a later date if you have anything particularly relating to this adventure. And of course, if you want to follow the Outdoor Station, I'd be very happy for you to do so. And there are various ways you can do that on Instagram, Twitter, and in Facebook, of course. And if you ever get bored, there are over 500 podcasts in the library over on the Outdoor Station, and you can pick those up virtually anywhere online if you want to listen to some of the stories. In particular, Alex's story when I spoke to him in 2017 after he'd finished the event. Okay, so let's go over to a couple of questions then, Sophie. They're not particularly complicated, but we'll drop it in. And one is from Martha Wheaton. Sophie, you have my utmost admiration. You mentioned that you frequently were encountering your own fear on your run. Has this changed in any way, having quite literally run your way through it?
I would say I'm still a massive wimp, and I still, if you asked me to go and wild camp on my own somewhere, I'd be nervous. I'd enjoy it more now, I think, but I would still be nervous. I very much accepted that I like to do things with at least one other person, because then I just feel safe. So yeah, I'm sorry, it's not the big, brave, life-changing thing that I wish it was, but yeah. Maybe I'm more confident, but yeah, I'm still a chicken.
I can't believe that for a minute. And the next one is from Debbie Simons. Would you do it again? That's a good question.
I've just been looking at a similar thing that I want to do. I would do it again, but I would do it properly, is what I would say. I would plan better. I mean, the resources are so much better. I've been looking through them this week, and I am tempted. I'm very tempted to try and do it again, but then I do also worry about not going to other places. So I definitely do a similar thing again, I think.
Right. Okay. Well, there's that answered. So thanks everybody that's dropped the questions in. Is there any more coming in, Rose?
Just got a little question. Sophie, there's quite a lot of concern about your hair.
Oh no, is that my sister's?
It's obviously changed quite a lot, and we're Emily's concerned. You know, that did you do it yourself?
Yeah. The hair is very much a lockdown, probably boredom thing that's happened. I did do it myself, but it's kind of level, so you know, I'm rolling with it.
Well, if it's your sisters, I'm sure you can charge them for your particular style when the time comes. Sophie, we've come to the end. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Thank you very much indeed for such an enjoyable book. And thanks to everybody that's joined in and watched this, and obviously those that put questions forward as well. We will be doing some more live streams next week. It might be more practical stuff this time. It might be outside camping or whatever it may be. Who knows? We might be speaking to someone equally as interesting as Sophie. So thank you once again, Sophie. And thank you everybody else. And until next time, bye.